My name is Jesse, and I work for the Boston Globe, and we've done a lot of work with responsive web design and responsible web design on the bostonglobe.com side of things, which just celebrated its 1-year anniversary. Boston.com, not so much. But I will have you know that we're going through the process now to transition something that really has been a highly trafficked website in the greater New England area for the last 16 years to something that is using more cutting-edge technologies. And so a lot of the things that we learned while we were building out bostonglobe.com, we are taking and applying to what we've got at boston.com. So you're going to see a lot of changes there here over the course of the next year. So I love quotes. I think they're great. Our age of anxiety is, in a great part, the result of trying to do today's job with yesterday's tools with yesterday's concepts. And I feel like responsive web design is, it's all summed up in that quote, that you cannot utilize the concepts that you had from how you built websites 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Let's just do it in tables.
Image maps.
Yeah, well, why not?
Well, you get pixel perfection with image maps.
So,
yeah.
And so a real big part of responsive and responsible web design is getting yourself out of the concept of thinking about pixel perfect design. I highly recommend everybody picking up a copy of Ethan Marcotte's Responsive Web Design. He actually was a great help in the development of the Boston Globe website, and his book is a religious movement for any of you that really want to get into responsive web design. So for me at the Globe, in dealing with iteration and dealing with the actual implementation of responsive web design, always starts with somebody going, ooh, I have a great idea. And so we sit down and we talk about that idea. And the important part about talking about the idea is the concept that the developer, you, are actually an educator. You are the one that is sitting there and telling someone, for the most part, what is and what is not possible, and sometimes doing it in the nicest possible tone, and sometimes a little bit more fierce. But there are limits to what you can bend the web to do. And with the way that things are changing, especially in the fluid medium that we work, it's really up to you to partner with the folks that are coming to you with these ideas in such a way that they can appreciate and understand all of the options that are available, whether good or bad. So, some things to always discuss. Again, the web is an interactive and it's a fluid medium. One of the things that I frequently run into is, well, we've got to make this perfect the first time out of the gate. And that's really not the case, because what's on my page today may not be what's on there tomorrow. And so convincing folks that this is a rolling target and that what you've built today can be augmented, changed, built upon, or even torn apart later is a big deal. Content really is key, and that really touches so much into what you've discussed, is that content is the focus, and especially in responsive web design, and I'll get into this in quite a bit more a bit later, but it's not about how pretty your website is, it's not about your graphics, it's not about any of the accoutrement, it's the content. No one's coming to see the background image you have. People are coming to your website because they want to consume the content that's there, and whether that's video, audio, an image gallery, or text, that's what they're there for. And this is something I have to deal with quite a bit. The person that's really important in the discussion about a new project or a new product that you're building onto your website is not anyone that's actually sitting around that table. It's your users. It's certainly not your ego. It's not how great of a developer I am, or look what I came up with. It's the folks that are actually stopping by your website. Because if you lose them, you're done. Next thing up, responsive web design development, responsible web design. It's not a buzzword. It's not a plug-in. It's a methodology. It's a way of doing business. In the same way that thinking about, writing PHP as opposed to having a bunch of spaghetti code on a page, maybe doing a model view controller as opposed to, I just have a page that handles everything. It is the same thing. And really, to hammer that home, communication of these concepts that, what is responsive, what is adaptive? And adaptive's that thing that I was talking about earlier with regards to the iPhone 5 and the iPad mini. I didn't have to write a single line of code And our website, the Boston Globe, will look fantastic on the iPad mini when it starts getting into users' hands. And I actually had my wife wait in line with our 1-year-old to pick up my iPhone 5. It was an indoor mall, so don't think I'm a terrible person. But she picked it up, and when she called me and said, "I've got it, it's activated, it'll be ready for you when you get home," the first thing I said to her was, "Have you gone to bostonglobe.com? How does it look?" So making sure that things are adaptive is really important. This is really important, and it'll make sense here in just a minute. Only an arrogant man would believe that he could plan a city, or somebody that loves SimCity. Only an unimagined man would want to. How is this important to this discussion? Well, frankly, I'm not a designer. I know that some of you may be, and I know that there are a couple of really great designers in this room, but I'll show you what the extent of my graphic design skill is. Okay, so that's it right there. So I'm not a designer. So what this means is that collaboration with various stakeholders, both the idea guy as well as the designers that are going to bring to fruition the layout, the way that the content is going to be shaped on the page, is imperative. It's not just one person coming up with all of this. When you're talking about social, when you're talking about the viewpoints, the breakpoints, how something's going to look, whether it's on a large screen device, a tablet, a mobile device, it's not just going to be one person that's a one-man show for all of this. You're going to have stakeholders that are more than just yourself. And so collaborating with them and establishing how this project's going to roll through is an incredibly important part. At the Boston Globe, I would say that no project has less than maybe 5 to 10 different stakeholders that are involved in the process. That's the product manager, that's the project manager, that's the developers, both the front end, the CMS, and the Java developers. That's the design team. And then it goes into editorial, and it goes into review, and it goes into Q&A. So there's a ton of folks that are involved at every single level that vet things, that make decisions, that may change something on a minute-by-minute basis. So let's go back to that great idea that we had that started the whole project. Some questions I always ask is really, what content is being used? And we talked about mobile first, and what we're going to be loading on a page just for this particular view set, going all the way up. So when you're first building a page, thinking about mobile first, thinking about what information is really at the top, the H1, if you will, of content that I want to display to people when they're visiting from a mobile handset. Then going down the list, finding the things that may not necessarily be as critical, but that would find a wonderful home as you get larger in that viewport. What user interactions are expected? A really great example of this is the My Saved feature that's available on the Boston Globe website. The way that My Saved works changes based on the viewport that you're using. When you're on a desktop, it's everywhere. You tap an article, or not tap, when you click an article, it's right there. It's the little bright red little button. You click it, you see it down in the smart footer, it shows you that the thing was saved, the article was saved, and on you go. You can come back to it later. It's a different experience when we move to a tablet or a handheld device, because we don't have that same click functionality. You tap, and it's going to open up the article. So we had to kind of rethink about how that works. How does it look on or act on a mobile device? How does it look or act on a tablet device? And how does it look or act on a large screen device? And you'll notice that I'm staying away from the word desktop. And there's a reason for that. And it's because this could be a desktop. I could have a Mac Mini plugged into this. Does this make this a desktop? So it's not really a desktop anymore. It's more about the size of the device. And one of the things that you showed with regards to the kind of the code snippets with media queries is we're really hyper-targeting this whole screen width, and or we're targeting device screen and then these minimum and maximum sizes. There's a whole plethora of screen types or viewports that you can target. There's projector, there's TV, there's even teletype for folks that are visually impaired. So we need to kind of think about some of these other technologies that are out there as well. This is just an example, getting into how we implement things at the Boston Globe. So somebody says, great idea, we're going to build X. And for the sake of my slide set here, we're going to talk about our anniversary free trial. So somebody comes up to me and says, all right, so this is what we're going to expect. We're going to expect, non-BG subscribers, that they're going to hit the homepage, they're going to have the following things happen, and these interactions are going to be on a variety of different pages, Metro, News, Arts, Business, whatever. Well, that's great, but it tells me absolutely nothing. It tells me how my user is expected to behave or the paths that I can allow my user to take, but it doesn't really tell me anything about how it looks or how it works. One of the great benefits of having an organization like the Boston Globe is that I'm not alone. I don't have to come up with all the answers myself. You may, depending on where you're at in your career or what you're doing. So when I get this stack of requirements, I thankfully have other folks that I can leverage. And so some of the things that we do before we even write a single line of code, of course, is to declare all the requirements for the project, what's needed. We deal with wireframes. And I'm going to have to absolutely agree with you guys. The next wireframe you build should be in HTML. There's really no reason to do it with Photoshop. There was a great article on A List Apart not too long ago that talked about this. Going in and changing a link color in Photoshop is more difficult than changing a declaration in CSS or Sass. So think about that next time you really are trying to prototype something out for yourself or for a client. Mockups, again, mockups, are kind of that same thing. And then style guides. And again, I have the blessing of working for the Boston Globe. We have a fairly well articulated style guide. It is imperative to declare these things early on, such that you're not arguing over what shade of blue. Which is actually what I did when I got to the Boston Globe, is that there wasn't a really well-defined set of colors. We didn't know exactly what color Boston Blue was or what color Blue Hover was. We knew kind of, but it was mostly through color picking and actually examining what colors were there. And sometimes they were on and sometimes they were a bit off. And so coming up and actually declaring those things, you were talking about a 12-column grid. We use a 14-column grid. And that kind of allows us a little bit more flexibility with regards to right and left rails and whatnot. We are right now stuck in pixels. At some point that's on boston.com. At some point in the future, that'll become more fluid. bostonglobe.com is set with the context. It's EMs, it's percentages, which is what allows it to collapse down when you're coming to it from a handheld device, when you're coming to it from a tablet, or you're looking at it on a large screen device. So something like this, even if you're just making it for yourself, for reference, is wonderful, and I highly recommend it. This will save you so much time. So we've got our initial design, and it looks like this. And I kid you not, this is an actual design that I've been given. So there's not a lot that this tells me. They basically said that it's optimized for an 800 pixel whatever breakpoint. This is for the Boston Globe, so we don't actually use pixels, but whatever. And it looks all right. I kind of have an idea what they're doing. They put some nice little text. I think that's that's Comic Sans, isn't it? Oh boy, moving on. So this is really what I do get. I get these quite frequently, that somebody has mocked this up and this is what we're to go on. Well, there's a problem here. This is not mobile first in any way. This is a large screen sort of layout, and it doesn't really tell me what's the most important element that I'm supposed to present. Obviously, this is a registration page, and I want to get somebody to register. So what do? Do I take this form and move it up? Do I tell them that the free trial is going to end in a handful of minutes? Is that the most important thing? So we come up with this whole concept of content negotiation, where the various stakeholders actually sit down and have a conversation about what are the important elements. And this, again, gets right back to what Allison was talking about, looking at the content as just that, not as something that's on the page that you can precisely say, well, this is the title, and it goes right up here at the top. But actually examining each piece and how important it is based on the viewport, based on the device accessing it. And so this conversation will hopefully dramatically affect what's going on here. So, content. 9 times out of 10, the first thing that I get is, again, this is my great idea, and I end up not having content. For those of you that haven't really mocked anything up yet, check into Lorem Ipsum. It makes all the difference in the world. People will ask you why you have just something random on the screen. But what this really allows is for you to flush out breakpoints. You can see where your content's going to wrap, where your content's not going to wrap, where things are going to work and where they're not going to work. So actually pre-filling your HTML5 wireframe that you've built up instead of some other template and dumping a whole bunch of this text into it is going to tell you where things work and where they don't work right off the bat. Among other things. Like, for example, you guys talking about how, a hover menu isn't going to work on a tablet. So, again, we have not even gotten to the point where we've talked about our responsive design. We've got this great little Comic Sans bubble design. It looks great. What does this mean? So, and I've wanted to say this over and over again while I've been listening to everything else. This is a great quote, and if you guys leave here with nothing else, please take this with you. We must be shapeless, formless like water. When you pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water into a tea kettle, bottle, teapot, it becomes the teapot. Right? Content is the water. It will and should assume whatever form you are putting it in. So that is something really to think about when you're thinking about how your designs work. And I recently had a conversation with a colleague of mine who was talking about his interpretation of content and how he was thinking about it a little bit differently than I was with regards to me thinking it was very fluid and him thinking that it was kind of a rigid structure. And so you're going to find that dichotomy between back-end folks that are really thinking about a particular hierarchy to content and this responsive web design where we're trying to, for all purposes, disembody content from the design, which is almost what we tried to do or did do 10 years ago with CSS and HTML. Who remembers font color tags, right?
Remembers, just
Right?
delete some.
I'm still using them.